Susan Kurtzman is going to present the story of Jobi Pottery, which is celebrating this year its 65th anniversary. And Susan's been running Jobi now for 15 years, so she's kind of late in the game here. 15 years is a pretty good time. I think we can all recognize how amazing it is that this small craft business that started here in the Highlands in 1953 is what it is today, where it's obviously much more popular than it was back in 1953, and is owned and treasured by, I think, people all around the world who come through the Cape. So much of the success is attributed to Susan. Susan's background is that she has a degree in design from the University of California, Berkeley, and a master's in special ed. Her design work was in ceramics, so this isn't something that just popped into her head. This is something that's been part of the love of hers for years, many years. But because she's still very young, just got out of school actually. So many of you obviously know Susan, not only through Jobi Pottery family, but Susan was also the director of this museum for many years. And a lot of what you see here is a result of Susan's work. You have so many accomplishments, Susan, it's hard, because you've been amazing. And I think important for the town and what you've done, not only for this museum, but for the society. And so thank you, and turn it over to Susan.
Hi. I don't know if I'm going to use this either. I can do my big girl voice, so maybe you'll hear me. But I don't know if you want to move forward. Some of you that are in the back, you might be able to see better if you do. And if you want to, please feel free to do that. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. It's good and loud. I might hold it. Is that better? Yeah, that's better. Okay. Well, Jobi Pottery. First of all, say hi to Joe and Bill. They're right up here. If you can't see them, stand up. We got Joe on the left and Bill on the right. And that picture was taken, oh, you're going to hold it up? This is Ed, my assistant. That's Joe on the left and Bill on the right. And thank you. Yeah. And those were the guys that started this whole thing back in 1950. So I'm going to run through these slides. You know what, if you have questions, if we could just save until the end, I'll go through this pretty quickly. I would like to give you a little demonstration of actually how we make it. And if you have any questions, when I get done with the slides, or if there's something really important, let me know in between. But, the story is really kind of interesting. Some of you know it already. Some of it I've made up, not really. But we started in 1953 with Joe and Bill, and this is our 65th year. And it all began in this little hot dog stand that was located right over here behind me by the Highland Lighthouse, next to it, right next door to it. And in 1953, Joe and Bill came here. They were in their 20s. One was from upstate New York, the other was from Bennington, Vermont. They were a couple, although back in the 50s, people did not say they were a couple. They said they were friends. They came here looking for a job, and somebody thought that the Highland House was a good place to stay. It was something pretty inexpensive. It was a summer hotel. This place there was a bar in the back, there were rooms upstairs, and the Conklins, Hal and Estelle Conklin, ran it as a hotel. So Joe and Bill got jobs here the first summer they were here as bartenders, and they also, one of them played the piano, the other played the organ. There was a piano here, so they played four hands on the piano for entertainment in the bar. The bar is right now, if you look back where the shipwreck room is, that was the bar. And it was called the Golden Eagle Bar. So Joe and Bill were actually in their 20s, were entertainers here, and Hal and Estelle said, we've got this little hot dog stand, how would you like to take it over and run it during the day and then be bartenders at night? So what they did is they went to the hot dog stand and they started building it out. to be a little bit bigger. And in the wintertime, they went back home and found some pottery that they could use to put candles and stuff in. And the first summer that they came back in 1954, they sold out everything within the first month. And they thought, wow, this stuff is really good. So they went back. More into the microphone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
So they went back. Oh, that's better. So they went back and bought the pottery business, and brought back these little molds that they were making, that the woman was making the pottery in, and I can show you that too. And they built out the Jobi Pottery, and the next year, 1955, they actually had a shop. And this is what the inside of the shop looked like. Everything was scavenged. The tables were spools from electrical equipment. All the shelves were driftwood. They actually made driftwood lamps, signs out of scrap wood and anything that they found. And it became a really popular little place, the Jobi shop. A lot of people who came here in the 50s for vacation remember going out to the Highland House, to the lighthouse, and visiting the Jobi shop and buying stuff. I've had a lot of people come into my store saying, I was 7 years old and it was, don't touch anything. It's the Jobi shop, you know. But we have a lot of people that come in and tell us they have very fond memories of going there as kids. If you can see, the lighthouse is behind this shop, and there's a radio tower there. And this was all, and the phone lines were up. They weren't underground like they are today. See the lighthouse?
Yeah.
See their car? And this is their shop? That's how close the Jobi shop was. And they built an apartment underneath and they started living here year-round. This is a picture of Bill actually pouring slip, which is liquid clay, into the mold. Let me show you a mold. This is what the molds look like. They're made out of plaster Paris. This one actually says 1957 on it. So the mold is basically something that they made that they wanted to do their shape in, or they actually bought them commercially. You could buy them in the 50s and 60s. I now have to find specialized people who make them today because nobody manufactures these anymore. But Joe and Bill made these molds, poured liquid clay, he's pouring it from a pitcher, right up to the top of the mold, and then what happens is the plaster mold absorbs the moisture from the clay and it starts to set up around the edge, sort of like a cake in the oven, you know, how it sets up around, cooks from the edge. So then you end up with a piece that is, you know, coating the whole inside. We dump out the center and you're left with this little piece here. It dries in the mold and then it pops out because it shrinks about 10% in the drying process. So that's how the Jobis made the pottery. Not on the wheel, but in plaster molds. It's called production pottery. And there were a lot of little pottery studios all up and down the coast of the East Coast and that made pottery this way. And it was considered tourist pottery, you know. Here's a picture of Joe taking the piece out of the mold. And you can see behind him, he's got all these pieces lined up on the shelves. Those are drying. They had to dry overnight. So once the pieces come out of the mold, then they dry. The next step is actually decorating the pieces of pottery. And the way the Jobis did it is different than a lot of people did it. A lot of people waited until they fired it and then decorated it. But for the Jobis, they actually painted on greenware pottery, which means it hasn't been fired yet. That means that it could just break off in your hand. It's really dry mud. So they painted on the greenware. And the reason why they did that is because the color and the design would be painted directly onto the clay, and then when it's fired in the kiln, it's actually baked into the clay. So it's not on the surface, it's actually baked right in. Here's some, I'm going to show you some pictures just pretty quickly of some of the original Jobi pottery. You might recognize it, the fish design. So this was the Truro minnow design, and Joe came up with this design. Bill came up with some of them, Joe came up with some of them. They also had helpers all along the way. Local artists and people who came in, worked a summer, you know, then left, students, people, you know, and I did the same thing. I have a lot of helpers. So Jobi Pottery has always been, one or two people who own the business and then a bunch of helpers. So this is a picture of Joe Caliano's original design, and this is the same thing in black and white. It's called we call it the traditional design. It's very 1950s in its pattern, and that's because design-wise, it's got this black spatter all over it, and that was very much like it was in the 50s, if you remember, Formica and linoleum. It all had that kind of spattery look. That was a 50s, 60s design element. This is a Bill Hastings original. So Bill was much more of an artist. He did scenes, one-of-a-kind things. He did boats, he did birds. This is just sort of a made-up harbor scene, but it could be here. He did it all in browns, grays, and blacks, and whites, and it's just kind of remarkable for just its artistry. Both of these guys were untrained as artists, which is, I find really kind of remarkable. They were musicians, but they weren't trained as artists. So when they got the pottery business, they did a lot of experimentation on the glazes, the colors, and the patterns. This is a seagull design that Bill came up with. They did the seagull design with a blue background and also with a yellow background. We carry through some of the designs today, and some of them have sort of dropped by the wayside. Things become popular sort of like in waves, and then they sort of come back and return. So sometimes, we have them, and sometimes we don't have them in the show. This is something that a local person gave me here in Truro that I had never seen before. It was a seahorse design, and I've never seen it since. It was a gift to me, and I'm very grateful for getting these old pieces because some of them are one-of-a-kind pieces that Joe and Bill did that are just out there in the world. You can find them on eBay sometimes. You can find them at yard sales. But if you find an old piece, grab it, because you might find something that's a one-of-a-kind. Peter Hunt was a pretty well-known artist in Provincetown. He did a lot of furniture painting in more of a Pennsylvania Dutch pattern. And his woodwork, and he used to buy cabinetry and then repaint it. He had a shop in Provincetown, and Nancy Wharf was also a well-known Provincetown painter. She worked for him when she was pretty young, and this was when she was working for the Jobis, painting pottery. She painted a Peter Hunt design on a Jobi Pottery piece, and I found this piece online and was totally stunned by the fact that Nancy Ward had done a Peter Hunt design on a Jobi Pottery piece. So we've got 3 artists' influence on this one piece. Very unlike any other Jobi piece you'll find. She probably did this in the 1960s. They didn't date anything, so as I've owned the business, I've been trying to sort of date things by the way things look, or who did it, or how it was done, or the patterns that were done, or even the glazes. So this is another Bill Hastings original of a lighthouse with chickadees, but it's not our lighthouse here. It could be something he made up. The same thing with the shapes of the pottery. This particular piece, which is a beautiful platter, we don't have the mold for that now. When I bought the business in 2003, I bought 250 Jobi original molds, but there were still some that weren't around anymore. And this was one of them. This is a big platter about this big. And it was narrow on one side, wide on the other side. And this is another Bill Hastings original, out of his mind fantasy sort of, location, but it could be here, influenced by the Cape. This is Bill at the Wurlitzer. Some of you have heard the whole stories about how Bill and Joe built a house in the 1970s in North Truro, and they rescued an organ from a silent movie theater in Connecticut. And it was an amazing Wurlitzer, and Bill, looking like Liberace, very much so here, they would give concerts in their house to raise money for the Highland House Museum, for this museum, and also for other organizations in Truro. They were very popular. They sold the concerts out before the season even started. And we have some recordings, and we have some old videotape of them playing. But people who remember going to these concerts remember them very fondly as being very showman-like, and Bill was very adept at the organ. This Wurlitzer had all these different stops in it, and every time he pulled a stop, another instrument would be playing. I was lucky enough to see the Wurlitzer in this house before it was taken out. And there was a room built behind it, and every one of those stops was connected to an actual instrument, a glockenspiel, a cymbal, something else. Every time he pulled it, an actual instrument was played. So it was kind of remarkable, and I can see how it was in a silent movie theater, accompanying a movie. In the mid-'70s, the Jobis sold the business to Lee Locke and Elizabeth Locke, who were from New Jersey and had been really good friends of ours for years. And Lee and Elizabeth decided to retire to the Cape and said to the Jobis, if you ever want to sell the business, let us know. So in the mid-'70s, they were ready to sell. And they sold it to Lee and Elizabeth, who took over the Jobi Pottery building, which had been moved in 1968 from this property to Moses Way off the South Highland Road. And when the National Seashore came in 1968, that was when Jobi Pottery actually was moved off the premises. Joe and Bill were the last people to run the Highland House as a hotel when the Seashore took over. And I think that they, at that point, were started to make the transition of selling the business. So the Locks took it over, but the Jobis wouldn't allow them to buy the name Jobi Pottery. So they called it Truro Crafters. And I have many customers that come in now who remember Elizabeth, who then also came up with her own designs. And Truro Crafters produced a lot of things. You can see macrame. Lee made candles and sand candles, and a lot of the candles were in the pottery. Some of the original designs are behind. If you can see the seagull design and the stripe design, those are original Jobi patterns. In 2014, or 2013, Elizabeth passed away, and the business was starting to go out of business. Her sons didn't really want to run it, and and so I talked with her about buying the business, and Joe said he would come out of retirement and help me figure out how to do it if I did. So I bought the business, and this is Joe at the age of 78 in 2014. Actually,
Susan, when did you buy the business?
I bought the business in 2003.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've got the wrong date on this. This is 2004, not 2014. 2004, thank you. He was 78 years old in 2004 and came out of retirement to show me how to do the business, actually how to make the pottery. So I have a design degree in ceramics, but I never made production pottery. I did things on the wheel, I made things by hand, but doing this production pottery and molds was something very new to me. And Lee and Elizabeth's son, Steve, also decided to work with me after I convinced him. And he became my production manager. He had worked with his mom and dad and had known the Jobis since he was 7 or 8 years old. So he had grown up in the business and knew how to work with the molds. So between Steve and Joe and I, we spent the year of 2003, 2004 putting together the new Jobi Pottery. In 2005, Joe had a stroke. So I was lucky enough to work with him just in the beginning, the first year and a half. We worked side by side, and he taught me how to do all the designs. Steve and I worked together to learn how to do all the molds, and built the new Jobi shop at 3 Depot Road in 2006. This is what the shop looked like on the inside, and that's what I look like in 2006. I learned how to do the fish design by trial and error, and also a lot of criticism from Joe that this one's too fat and that one's too long, and the tails are too sharp and now they're too dull, and the colors are wrong, and on and on and on. But sitting side by side with him, I actually learned how to do all of the designs. Cattails, pussy willows, the fish, the lighthouses, everything that they had done, he taught me how to do, which was really terrific, because then I was able to show other people. These are some scenes from, and this is a picture of Steve Locke, Lee and Elizabeth's son. So I asked Steve if he would come and show me how to do this, and he said, I'll come for 2 weeks, but you have to pay me. I said, okay, I'll pay you for 2 weeks. And at the end of 2 weeks, I said, and what job do you have? And he said, well, I don't have a job right now. I'm taking care of my kids. My wife is working. And I said, well, I think you should work here. So now it's been 15 years, and he hasn't quit yet. So, we're like, people think we're married, but we're married to this business, as I'd say. But I couldn't do it without Steve. He's the production manager. He works miracles with these molds. I've actually found a mold maker in Orleans who will help me remake the molds. So I've learned how to do mold making on top of ceramic, which is really, another skill.
Why do you have to remake the molds?
The mold, thank you for that question. The molds only last for 100 times. If you make 100 pieces, sometimes even less, they start to break down. They're made of plaster and they're very soft, and what happens is they get to the point of saturation and they won't absorb the moisture any longer. So they don't work. Sometimes they break, they chip, they can crack. If you get mold pieces into the clay, they won't fire right. So we have to make sure that we have, good operating molds all the time. The best way to assure that is to have a master mold made, and I've actually done that for many of the molds. I did bring one tonight, but it's a silicone rubber positive, and then we make the mold around it. So by having the silicone rubber positives, I can make a number of production molds from one piece. And that allows me to make more than one piece at a time. So instead of making one mug at a time, we can do 12 mugs at a time. But this is a picture of Steve pouring, just like Bill did, liquid clay, which is called slip, into the mold. These are the molds set up and they're drying. So these are pinch pots, and it takes a couple of hours for them to start to absorb the moisture, and then they start to set up, and then Steve would pour each one out individually, and we would reuse the clay. Everything is reused. Once they're poured out, they dry. This is the back of a plate, and they're ready to be cleaned. Using a sponge and a fettling knife and sandpaper and lots of other tools, Steve will clean the pieces until they're very smooth and dust-free. Now every mold, and let me show you this. I'll talk real loud. Every mold has, this one is a 1-part mold, but I also have a mug mold like this, which is a 2-part mold. Do you see how that came out? It's got 2 parts. You pour it in, open it up, the mug comes out that way. This one was just poured this morning. It's still wet. And it hasn't been trimmed along the top. So using a fettling knife, we would cut that off. Then we would wait for it to dry. It has mold marks on the side. You can see where the seam is from the 2 parts. Steve would actually take a sponge and water. You might use something like this and clean it off until it's nice and smooth and ready to be painted. At that point, he puts it on the shelf, and then I paint it along with several helpers who are helping me do it, and this changes year to year.
Does it just air dry?
They just air dry. And what's interesting about that is that depending on the moisture in the air, it could take a couple of hours or a couple of days. If it's humid like it is today, it takes much longer for the molds to set up, and then when they come out, it takes longer for the clay to dry because the moisture just air dries out of the actual clay. When the clay is sitting on the shelf drying, it also shrinks too, so it's going to be a little bit smaller. This is an old picture of me. I love this old picture. I used to look like that. So the next step after they have dried and we have cleaned them is decorating them. And remember I said we decorate them on the greenware, which means it hasn't been fired yet. I'll show you that too. So we've got it, came out of the mold, it's all rough, gets cleaned, then it gets actually painted with the design right on the piece. And this is a piece that, I'm gonna break this one. It's okay. It's a dud. These pieces just break like that. Okay, it's just dry clay. You can pass these around. Just pass them around and see what the dry clay feels like. It's very dusty, it's very soft, it's very smooth, and we paint right on it. That means that everybody that's working on these has to be careful, because you can chip it, you can knock it, you can break it, you can crack it, there's a lot of things that happen. So everybody that works on them has to be very careful, right, Ed?
Is the clay a secret mixture?
What?
Is the clay a secret mixture?
It's not a secret mixture. It's actually the same mixture that the Jobis use, and it's commercially made in Pennsylvania. It's low fire earthenware. It's a combination of ball clay and kaolin, and there's another clay in there too. Actually, clay is not just one type of clay. Clay is just a type of earth that comes out of the ground, and people mix it to depend on what they want to get out of it. Like, this is something that you can decorate with bright colors. You can fire it at a lower temperature. It's not as sturdy as things like stoneware or porcelain or other hard clays that fire at a higher temperature. So there's a lot of chemistry and stuff involved with the actual making of the clay. We don't do that. It would take forever for us to do that. We also don't make the glaze that we use or the colorant that we use. The colorant that we use is also called slip, and it's underglaze, and it's slip that has a color in it. I buy that commercially. The only problem with that is a lot of these companies are now going out of business because very few pottery makers make pottery this way. So since I bought the Jobi Pottery business, we've had 2 glaze manufacturers go out of business. So now what I'm doing is I'm buying colors and mixing them to get the same Jobi colors. And I'm having to do a lot of color testing to make sure that I get the same color mix. I'm always trying to match what the Jobis did originally, because people collect them and they want to get the same thing year after year. And things that match the stuff they got in the 50s and 60s too. So it's kind of like, I don't know, just have to fool around with it, and I do that in the wintertime. But going back to the clay is usually made of several types of clay, and this is low fire earthenware. When it comes out of the, when it's wet, which this is very wet, it's gray. It turns lighter as it dries. We paint on that at this point, and the next step is firing it so that it doesn't break. And that's called the bisque firing. So the next firing, we've got the design on it, and then we fire it. This is breakable, this isn't. Okay, so that's the first firing. It fires at 04, which is 1940 degrees in an electric kiln for 12 hours, cools down for 24 hours, and then we glaze it. This picture is me hand painting the design on the greenware. Here's a close-up. And another one. Every single fish is painted freehand. We don't use decals, we don't use stencils, we don't adhere anything to it. It's all painted freehand, by hand, by people. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand. Yes.
If you make a mistake with painting, can you fix it, or is that it?
If you make a mistake, yes, you can fix it. If you can make a mistake at this point, you can fix it. Once it's fired, you can't. If I make a mistake and I do the fish backwards, sometimes I leave it and then I go, it's one of a kind. If I make a mistake and I have a big splotch on there that I don't want, I wait till it dries and I sand it off with sandpaper. You can't wipe it off and you can't wash it off, because what happens is the underglaze sort of goes right into the clay. You don't see it until it's fired, and then all of a sudden it's a cloudy, weird-looking thing there. So you have to sand it off. But you can fix mistakes, or sometimes they become happy accidents, as we call them. I can give you a perfect example. I do fish now that have little bubbles going up, Can you imagine what happened, how I got the bubbles? A big drop. After I did the fish, there was a big drop right in front of his nose, and I went, oh, now what am I going to do? Oh, let's do 3 or 4 of them, bubbles. Happy accident, because I sold that, and now everybody wants them with bubbles. What do we do in the wintertime? This is what Jobi Pottery looks like in the wintertime. If you live here, you know that. We do a lot of production. That means that the shop is closed. Our online business is still open, but we don't really have a whole lot of online business. Most of the business is in the shop. So in the wintertime, we hunker down in the studio and really produce. And that means we sit there and we paint pottery anywhere between 4 or 6 hours a day. I'll sometimes do some hours in the morning, and I like to do hours at night. I've got a few helpers now. Ed Christie in the audience here. Eli Kurtzman, my son up here, and his fiancee Maria Gill, help me. I've got Polly Watson, who is my neighbor down the street, who's going off to Harvard in the fall. I'm going to lose her, but she's been helping me. And Robert Callahan, who's my store manager, who paints all the lighthouse designs. So right now, Jobi Pottery has 4 or 5 people that are on a regular basis helping us paint pottery. And I still do the fish, the cattails, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But this is the beginning of the colorful design. This is 6 layers of underglaze painted in a random pattern. And over that, I put the fish. Here's some pictures of bisque pieces waiting to be fired. Remember I said 1950 degrees gets the bisque firing. Then they're overglazed. I'll show you that process. So the bisque firing, we went from greenware to bisque firing, 1940 degrees. Then we dip the whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel, into an overglaze, silicone-based overglaze, okay? So this is the stuff that when it melts in the kiln makes it shiny and impervious to water, makes it food safe and everything like that. Everything that we do has to be dipped or hand painted in the overglaze, and the reason why it's this color of toothpaste is that if we make a mistake or we missed a spot, we can see where that is, and we can use a brush to touch it up before it goes in the kiln, because every bit of it has to be covered. Because it's silica-based, when it melts, it would adhere to the kiln shelf if we just put it in there. So we put it on these little stilts. They're wire stilts. Every piece has to be put into the kiln on a wire stilt. So Jobi Pottery, when you buy it, you'll notice there's 3 little spots on the bottom from that stilt, and that shows you that it's ours and that it's handmade. When it comes out, it looks like that. So that's the whole process. There's 14 steps. It takes about 3 weeks from the beginning to the end to get a full kiln, get it fired, and do the whole process, because each kiln gets fired separately. The bisque kiln, 1940 degrees for 12 hours, cools down for 24. Then we've got to glaze it. The glaze has to dry, then it goes in the kiln at 06, cone 06, which is 1800 degrees, and that goes for another 8 to 12 hours, and it cools down for 24. So it's a long process between, you know, the cleaning and the painting and the firing. I always say 3 weeks. So this is a glaze kiln that's loaded. Every piece can be in there close together, but they can't touch each other, because if they did, they would fuse together in the glaze kiln. I have 2 electric kilns, and they both, you know, they're both about, I don't know, this big. I guess I can fit anywhere between 100 and 300 pieces into a kiln, depending on the size. Here are some, just some designs to show you some of the examples if you haven't seen it before. That's a cattail design, the first design that Joe ever showed me how to paint. This vase over here with the flowers is the same design. Then there's a lighthouse design. Robert Callahan does that one now. I've got multicolored fish design. Eli and Maria do that one. Blueberry design, Robert does that. This pussy willow design I haven't done in a while. And Ed helps me on all kinds of designs, including his own rainbow design. This is a color test plate. Remember I said I have to mix glazes because I can't get the right colors all the time. So I'll do a color test like this where I'll make notes to myself on it, and we'll put it in the kiln and see how things come out before we actually put it on the clay. Joe and Bill did a lot of stuff where they used commercial glazes and did one-of-a-kind pieces. That case over there, if you come during the daytime, has some examples of some of their early pieces that have all kinds of colors we don't have today, we can't find today. Some of them are not designs, they're just sort of drippy glazes that they just did things as fast as they could and differently. They weren't concerned about actually getting everything uniform. When I took the business over, I decided there are so many designs and so many one-of-a-kinds, I'm going to have to make some choices on what I'm going to have. So some of the pieces have gone by the wayside. Some of them we can't do them anymore. And you know, I'm trying to still match colors, so I pick things like this. So here's some examples of the old and the new. The striped pieces in here are the old designs. The solid pieces and the ones with the waves are my designs. I try and make everything to mix and match so that people can, you know, mix and match the old designs with the new designs. All the bright colors were added when I bought the business. I really like bright colors, so I added bright colors. Joe and Bill did stuff that were much more muted, earth tones and that kind of thing. Also, red, orange, and some of the other glazes had lead in them in the 50s and 60s, and they were not food safe. So they didn't really use a lot of those bright colors for dinnerware or things that you ate often.
So they were aware of that, of the.
I think that they were aware that a lot of glazes had lead in them. You can't buy those glazes today. You can't buy them in the state of Massachusetts or anywhere in the U.S. I can't vouch for what you get from China or other places, but you know, in this country, you're not allowed to use lead. Everything is lead-free. In 2014, I opened a new shop. The little Jobi shop went by the wayside, actually became my house. And this is the new Jobi shop, which is on Route 6, next to Savory and Sweet Escapes. And that's me. Still painting after all these years. This just shows you how many pieces I might be doing at once. This is my production bench. You know, if I'm going to do something in the colorful design, I'm not going to do one or two pieces. I'm going to do a whole lot of pieces. And this is what it looks like when it's done. The spoon holders show you some of our bright solids. This is a wave design. This is a contemporary design I made to match my kitchen. With an old Jobi sign behind it. This is a traditional, the Jobis did all this striped wear, which was the traditional dinnerware pattern, like this. And I just added a new color. I added cobalt, which made it like just a different version. But their whole thing was, I said to Joe, you know, like you always did the fish like up and down like that. He never did swimming fish, and I always do swimming fish and schooling fish. And he said to me, well, I was an accountant, I like everything straight. That was the big joke. In 2016, Jobi Pottery was chosen by our new state senator, Julian Sear, to represent the arts for the Cape and Islands. So I'm really proud to say that our Jobi platter is on display at the State House right now in Boston, representing the arts for the Cape and Islands. Then the next generation. This is Eli Kurtzman, painting pottery with his mother. Whoops. I've actually started doing some new original designs. This is my new one for this year. I've gotten into birds. My stuff has much more contemporary look than the traditional Jobi things. Eli has come up with his own designs too. He's been working for the business for 5 years now. This is Eli's fishing lure, and his anchor, and his red dory. Robert Callahan, who works with me, has done some one-of-a-kind pieces that are really extraordinary. Robert does miniatures on piano keys. He paints watercolors on antique piano keys. They're really remarkable. We have some of them in the gallery. But I asked if he could upsize them and actually do some one-of-a-kind Jobi pieces. So this harbor scene is one of Robert's originals. Remember the Nancy Wharf original? The Peter Hunt look? This is the Robert Callahan. We've also revived some of the old designs, especially this year. So this is an old brown lighthouse design with sandpipers, and we decided to do a few of these pieces. They really look like the old ones, but they're new, just to bring them back. And then we've got Ed's rainbows. The rainbow design's been really popular. We tried that out last year, and this year it's selling out. So thank you, Ed. We have a lot of happy customers. So I'm really proud to say that, Jobi Pottery has gone through 3 different families over 65 years, and we're still standing and going strong. It's really kind of an exciting place to be working with this legacy business, a cottage industry in Truro that's never left Truro. I'd be happy to answer questions. I can show you more of a painting demonstration if you want, but I do want to thank a whole lot of people. Joe and Bill, the Historical Society that is my bedrock here. We have a Jobi room upstairs, and Steve Locke, who's been my manager for 15 years, Sarah Johnson, who's my website guru, and today I have Steve Quattralla, who's my digital genius right there in the Steve probably put this presentation together like in no time flat. And I want to thank my crew, because you guys, I couldn't do it without you, and that's Steve and Eli, Maria, Robert, Ed, and Polly Walker, who's not here today, but thank you all. And these are people who have worked for me over the years, and some of them you know. Annette Sear, Julian Sear's mom, our state senator's mom, painted pottery for me for 6 years. Jillian Canavan, Deb Shaw, Alyssa Cohen, Liberty Shope, and Marissa Picarello, who's now working at Castle Hill. We've had a lot of local people coming in and out helping, and it's really been terrific. And this is in fond remembrance of Schooner. Some of you knew Schooner, the Wonder Dog, who was our first shop dog. And this is our new shop dog, Lola. Thank you, everybody.